Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cover One Roundup here live on the Cover One YouTube channel each and every Monday night, or subsequently wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, Kyle Silagyi, joined this and every week by David Fox, and today we have what will certainly not be a controversial episode for you. This episode certainly was not provocatively titled, and it will not attract fans from all across at least one conference of the National Football League. And our comments will not be overflowing with people telling us why we are wrong in our assessments of their favorite football teams. But hopefully, fingers crossed, that's going to be the case because we are going through the AFC, the American Football Conference. Thank you very much. None of that international stuff, right? We don't want any of those international teams that are in the National Football Conference, I guess. And we're going to be, going through each team, going through their off seasons, their drafts, and just kind of judging where they are. And then at the end, via this tier list, you will have it's a lovely tier list. You will have a pretty decent understanding of how we feel about each team and where we think they rank with respect to the other teams in the AFC. So, David, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Kyle. It's Monday. It's now definitely out of season here. I don't know if you're familiar with the patterns of Southwest Florida, but there's snowbird season, right, which usually begins around October and ends around Easter. And then there's reading season, where I can just sit at my counter at work and just read a book if I really want to, or write copious amounts of notes on what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Kyle?
We could unpack a can of worms with that one, but this is not therapy. This is the Cover One Roundup here live each and every Monday night on the Cover One.
Should we get a BetterHelp sponsorship?
If these ads that are showing up on the side of the tier list are tailored and are based on my algorithms, y'all might see some interesting stuff tonight. That's all I'm gonna say. This Metamucil, I don't think. That might be, though. I don't know. I don't know how deep they get with the targeted ads. RJ writes, hey, everyone. Mark writes, good evening, Kyle and David. Have a great show and Monday evening. You as well, Mark. Thank you. What a kind comment. We are starting off great here, David. And great vibes here. And we will get into this tier list here in just a moment, because I feel like, just based off of, our rapport and how long podcasts tend to go, it's going to be a long one. So we have to get into the actual tier list. But before we can do that, this show and Cover One in general are brought to you by BetUS, who we will hear about from right now via our colleague, Greg.
Hey guys, Cover One is excited to announce our new partnership with BetUS. BetUS has live wagering on all major games, the best betting variety in the business, and an easy deposit and withdrawal process with the fastest payouts in the industry. Our loyal Cover One fans get a choice between two exclusive offers, either a 125% sign-up bonus on your first deposit up to $2,500, or a free $50 bet with no deposit required. Just use promo code COVER1 on the links provided in the show description below. BetUS, where the game begins.
Thank you, Greg, and BetUS. And speaking of code Cover1, this show and Cover One in general are brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. David, can you tell us a little bit about Underdog?
I would love to tell everyone about everyone's favorite fantasy football website, and that is Underdog Fantasy. Now, if you did not get the chance to draft Josh Allen in your home league last year, you are unfortunately very unlucky, and I sympathize with you. However, if you use Underdog Fantasy's Pick'em contest, you can win money predicting if Josh Allen will go over his yard total, his touchdowns, his completions, and more. If you think Allen to Diggs will blow up this week, maybe even Allen to Dalton Kincaid, whether you think he should be a tight end or a wide receiver, who's to say? Maybe he's your flex option in fantasy. Who knows? You can put both of them into your pick'em, predict up to 5 different over-unders correctly, and win 20 times your original money. If you use promo code COVER1, that's the number 1, when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That's 100 free US dollars if you use promo code COVER1. Sign up today and start winning today.
Thank you, Underdog. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we have to get into before we get into the tier list? I'm looking through our graphics. I found a new graphic. Hopwatch. DeAndre Hopkins might get released. That would be fun.
That would be so funny if Arizona just like totally squandered a chance to get any sort of meaningful assets out of a DeAndre Hopkins trade and just straight up released him. That would be really fun, especially after like, because that's
not a bad draft.
A great draft, arguably, where like they trade back and then they trade up to get a guy that they wanted, and then they collect all of these assets for next year. But that was sandwiched in between, like, you know, a potential DeAndre Hopkins release afterwards. And right before the draft started was, hey, we tampered to get Jonathan Gannon as our head coach. So now we just have to give up another pick for no reason. Because we were just so desperate to have Jonathan
Gannon. And it's paid off. The vibes have just been incredible in Arizona ever since they hired him. No one is questioning that one. But yeah, no. D-Hop was on, what was he on? He was on like a Brandon Marshall podcast or something like that.
Okay, brief aside. There's too many former NFL player podcasts.
There are a lot of them.
They're all the same. They are literally all the same thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't listen to any of them. But I see clips and they seem interesting. I mean, you could make the argument that there are too many podcasts in general, right? There do not need to exist as many podcasts as there do. But Brandon Marshall's podcast, there's a lot of football podcasts, and his is certainly one of them. And DeAndre Hopkins was on the said podcast, and he talked about the quarterbacks that he'd like to play with, and Josh Allen was the first one mentioned. So there's your roundup, if you will, right? D-Hop talk covered. Our opinions on it, I'm sure, are the same as they were months ago when we talked about the idea of potentially bringing in DeAndre Hopkins. He's still the same player that he was months ago, presumably. So let's get into it. Let's get into the tier list here. As you can see, we have this beautiful tier list, colors ranging from red to green, opposite of how it should go, right? Presumably green would mean good and red would mean bad, but that's not.
Well, you know, red is kind of like fire. Like, oh man, that team's straight fire.
Good point.
You know? And green is kind of just like, oh yeah, we're just kind of relaxing. We're touching grass, you know?
Nice.
See? It's about how you spin it, Kyle. Come on.
Zone. It's all spin zones.
Right.
So yes, I just used, right. This might shock you, right? I kind of cut a corner and I just used the same tier list as we did, or that I made last year for this. I remembered my login for this godforsaken website.
Honestly, I feel like that's more work than trying to figure out
remembering the login. Remembering which burner Twitter account I used to log into this bullshit. So yes, last year I tried to get a little bit cute, if you will, with the tier rankings. I had like S for Super Bowl, A for astute, right? I tried to get cute. This year I just went literal because it needs to be literal. It's a lot easier. So our top tier 1, these teams should be contending for the Super Bowl. Barring any injury or unforeseen circumstances, these teams should be in Super Bowl contention come the end of the year. Tier 2, these teams should be good, but aren't quite cream of the crop, so to speak, you know, to quote Randy Savage, to have a Macho Man quote in there. What other, I don't know if there's any other Macho Man quotes I could have used, like, oh yeah, like I could have done, oh yeah. I don't know if snap into a Slim Jim would have worked though, but cream of the crop is type good, or is fitting. Next tier 3. These teams would go 8-8 if that were still a thing. That's self-explanatory. And then these two tiers. These tiers, it wouldn't be a cover one roundup unless I like created some arbitrary rules to make it more confusing than it has to be. So when we get down here, the rankings may not be like, you know, like I'm sure there will be some teams that end up in tier 5 that will end with stronger records than teams in tier 4, right? Because the tiers are these teams will be bad but fun, these teams will be bad and sad, right? So like the Raiders, for example, are probably going to be in tier 5. They'll probably have a better
spoiler,
right?
Kyle.
I know, right? That's crazy. That's just the only spoiler. I'll give one more spoiler actually. They might have a better record, that they will probably have a better record than the Texans. But the Raiders will be in a lower tier because the vibes out of Las Vegas are going to be so much worse than the vibes coming out of Houston. So let's just get into it because there's a lot that we have to discuss on this podcast. And we will start with the team that not everyone, most people, I would assume, who subscribe to the Cover One YouTube channel and watch the Cover One Roundup are fans of this team, the Buffalo Bills. So ranking them is interesting because if you go by Twitter discourse the last couple of months, not only nationally, right? Like actually more hyper focused within Bills Twitter and amongst Bills fans. But there are the one off or the occasional national analysts who suggest, or national person who suggests that the Bills aren't as good as they were and that their window is closing, that their window is not as big as we previously thought it to be. So just going over their offseason, right? Just briefly looking at their offseason. They went 13-3 last season, lost in the divisional round to Cincinnati. We all remember that. Their offseason losses include Tremaine Edmonds, their starting middle linebacker over the last 5 years. Defensive coordinator Leslie Frazier steps away from the game for a year, presumably, or maybe longer, or maybe who knows. They also lose Isaiah McKenzie and the big one, Jaquan Johnson. Offseason acquisitions include Connor McGovern, Deontay Hardy, Taylor Rapp, Damian Harris, Trent Sherfield, and David Edwards. And then in the draft, I'm not going to name every player that every team drafted, but just like the marquee draft picks for each team. The Bills get Dalton Kincaid, arguably the best pass catcher in this year's class. They also get Osiris Torrence, potential day one starting guard, and Dorian Williams, who we'll see how the Bills use him at linebacker. So, this is a team that at this time last year, when we did this, we had them up here. We had them in S tier. They may have been our best team. And I think most people had them as their best team because they were the hot team, because they had just come off that divisional round loss to KC that was so hotly contested with the Gabe Davis 5 touchdowns or whatever. And then they signed Von Miller. So everyone was like, this team is just going to be a wagon. They're going to circle the wagons, if you will. They're going to run over everybody. And they were Super Bowl favorites, betting favorites. Everyone thought that the Bills were just going to run over the league. And at times it looked like they were going to. But then they hit that midseason kind of struggle. All that adversity kind of piles up against him. Josh injures his elbow. And we see how the season ends in Cincinnati. So right now they are not the betting favorite to win the Super Bowl, but they are the favorite to win, I believe, 13 or 14 of their games as of right now. I think they're only supposed to lose like 3 or 4 games, which is crazy. But like I don't think they're the best team in the AFC, right? I think there are 2 teams better. That said, I do think that the Bills did enough this offseason. I think that they identified their holes, they identified their weaknesses, and I think they addressed them in strong enough ways. And their other holes, I think that they're going to fill in interesting enough ways, that being middle linebacker, with Sean McDermott now calling the plays defensively and presumably more dime looks with Taylor Rapp. I think that I don't know if they'll be a better team than they were last year, but I think that they are still a tier 1 Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I mean, I would be hard pressed to just say that they're not, right? I mean, this is the benefit of having one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Is that you can kind of just say, yeah, maybe they're not great here or there or whatever, but like, that sort of stuff doesn't matter when you just have a quarterback that could do the types of things that Josh Allen does. And despite what the feelings might be right now, given that the loss to Cincinnati was as brutal as it was, and it was brutal, like that was a difficult one to really take in the moment. It's still a very good team that just kind of let's call it what it is. They just pooped their pants in that game. But they're a good team, and I think that assuming they are healthier in 2023 than they were in 2022, especially in the secondary where they just had all these different injuries to safety, and safety being a big part of what they're able to do defensively and disguising coverages and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that you'll find this defense being able to create more plays rather than sort of letting the offense sort of dictate terms to them. I think this will be a more aggressive defense rather than a passive defense like it was under Frazier. I think that, Ken Dorsey in year 2, I'm a little bit more optimistic about Dorsey than I think most people would be. It's not to say that I think Ken Dorsey is like amazing or anything like that, because I don't. But I do think that, there's things. The problem with like Ken Dorsey is not necessarily like where a lot of offensive coordinators have issues, where it's like they're too like condensed and too like unaggressive and whatnot. It's that Ken Dorsey's probably a little too over aggressive, especially with a quarterback like Josh Allen, and then also doesn't like, create a ton of outlets and help Josh Allen a lot. But I think those are like really easily fixable problems. And one of the ways that you fix that problem is by getting someone like Dalton Kincaid, who can be that underneath type of threat and be the guy in the slot that can go over the middle, all that sort of fun stuff. So I do think that, it's hard to say that they're going to be the best team in the AFC coming into the season. But to say that they're not going to be in contention for a Super Bowl, I think is short-sighted and inaccurate. I think that they are one of the 3 best teams in the AFC, and it's going to be another tough one, because unfortunately, the AFC has gotten very, very good right as the Bills have gotten very, very good, which is really unfortunate after watching almost 20 years of Tom Brady and the Patriots just sort of going in cruise control into the AFC Championship, and then, maybe they make the Super Bowl, maybe they don't, whatever,
Right. It's like every team, the reign of terror ended, and they were like, now's our time. And then all running into the wall at the same time. But yeah, that was one of the things I noticed when I was kind of going over and organizing my 6 pages of notes to do this podcast, is we are going to have more teams in tier 1 and 2, maybe than we have in the last 3 tiers combined. Like, maybe not. It's going to be close, though. Like, there are a lot of good teams in the AFC this year. A lot of good teams. A lot of teams that I didn't realize how good they were until I sat down and actually started looking into their depth chart, looking into their drafts. Or I was like, oh my. Like, one of the teams we're going to get to here after this next team that we're going to talk about. But just like, what were we going to say?
Before you jump into your next thing, I'm going to address a comment from Roy Collins. If you'll allow me, I actually have last year's results. I can very quickly go through them
for our tier list.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's.
So
what do we do?
At the top, we have S tier or Super Bowl tier.
Okay.
Bills and Chiefs. Chiefs went to the Super Bowl and won. Bills made it to the divisional round. I'd say it's pretty good. Astute, we had Baltimore.
Okay, fair.
It was fair and reasonable at the time, and they still made the playoffs with a backup quarterback. Granted, that backup quarterback was a Pro Bowler, but still.
Right. And at the beginning of the season, Baltimore looked like world beaters.
Yeah,
They looked great.
Yeah. The Chargers, who made the playoffs and
that's
very
fair.
quickly left the playoffs.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then the Bengals, who made the AFC Championship.
Yeah.
So that was A tier. B, or mid-tier, was the Dolphins, Titans, Raiders, Colts, Browns, Broncos. That is the worst part of this in every way imaginable. Dear God in heaven. So the Dolphins, make the playoffs despite their own doing.
Right.
The Titans absolutely tanked after midseason. The Raiders absolutely tanked the entire season. The Colts hired Jeff Saturday midseason. The Browns tried their best.
Yeah.
And then just couldn't quite do anything. And then the absolute unfathomable nightmare of Nate Hackett's Denver Broncos. Oof. I'm still flabbergasted at how bad that team was.
Well, we'll get
It's
into
actually
Denver
impressive.
soon. We'll get into Denver soon.
C, or crummy, was the Steelers, Jets, and Patriots. Jets more closer to mid, maybe even closer to
they should have been B tier.
Yeah. The Patriots, crummy, probably somewhere in between C and B, just because that defense was great, but that offense was garbage. And then the Steelers looked crummy. Actually, they probably looked more like D tier for most of the season. And then Mike Tomlin, as he does, just pulls wins out of his ass.
Right.
And then at the bottom was the Texans and the Jaguars. They were D, dog water. And the Jaguars,
Jags down there.
The Jags did not look good to start the season. They did not.
No, they didn't. But like I've always been an ETN guy. I should have been banging the table for ETN. I should have been like, no way.
We just didn't know what this team was going to look like after the Urban Meyer disaster. We didn't know. We didn't.
Yeah.
It was just such a like, who knows? But I don't know about this roster. And that was like right after they like paid Christian Kirk and Zay Jones to be like their guys, right?
For that, yeah.
And like, to be fair, both of those guys played very, very well for them. So,
right now, we're gonna get into all of this. We're gonna uncover all of that here momentarily. But yes, before we'll get into Cincinnati here next, our next team. But yes, I think that we talk about the Bills every week on this podcast, right? Like they are still a tier 1 contender, not the best team in the AFC on paper, but a very strong team, a team that, again, barring disaster, will be in contention come the end of the season. Cincinnati, I don't think there is much to talk about, but we will. They are above the Bills. Just in terms of being a contender, they should be in Super Bowl talk by the end of the season. Last season, they go 12-4, lose in the AFC Championship, of course, to the Kansas City Chiefs. In free agency, now they had an interesting offseason. In free agency, they lose Jesse Bates, Von Bell, Trey Flowers, and Samaje Perine. But they acquire the best lineman maybe that they could have acquired given their situation, Cody Ford. They also go out there and get Orlando Brown, Sidney Jones, Irv Smith Jr., and Nick Scott, who is presumably going to start at safety for them opposite Dax Hill. They also re-signed Jermaine Pratt, bring him back, and then they draft Miles Murphy, interesting, and DJ Turner, Jordan Battle. Those are kind of their marquee draft picks. So again, this is a very strong team, and then they still have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They lose P. Ryan behind Mixon, and Mixon's kind of wishy-washy given his legal status, but Joe Mixon is a very good running back, and improved offensive line with Orlando Brown there now. They're going to be starting Cody Ford, which is interesting, if Cody Ford is starting. Interesting. Best of luck with that, Cincinnati, but hopefully he's not starting. But still, very good team. And I think that they are in Super Bowl contention.
Absolutely. So here's what's interesting, right? Like Cincinnati's offense is honestly, you could probably call Cincinnati maybe the most consistent team in the conference, right? Where it's like they started off pretty rough, right? Like that offensive line looked like they spent all this money and got zero improvement early on. But then they started running the ball more effectively. They started setting up a little bit more play action. They started just making improvements to make their offense more consistent, which they were, and they did. The defense, I mean, with Lou Anarumo, is just super consistent week in and week out. And Anarumo was a finalist for that Arizona job. Unfortunately, Monty Austinfort decided to tamper and get Jonathan Cannon. But the transition with Cincinnati is interesting, right? Because like you said, they lost Bell and Bates. You also buried the lead. They lost Eli Apple. I mean,
you're right.
I mean, I don't know if he like disappeared or just sort of died. Maybe that would be nice, right?
Whoa, jeez. Oh boy, this podcast is getting canceled. Continue.
I can't with that fucking douchebag. So there's a lot of they're relying on a lot of different pieces in that secondary, right? Where you have Dax Hill in year 2, and I mean he seemed okay last year based on what I very briefly saw of him. He obviously didn't play like a ton because you had Jesse Bates and Von Bell in front of him. You bring in Nick Scott from the Rams, who was fine for that defense, but what the Bengals run versus what the Rams have run with Staley and Raheem Morris. I mean, those are some pretty different defenses. Those are pretty different styles of defense we're talking about here. And then you have Cam Taylor-Britt, who a lot of people liked coming out of that draft class last year. He's in year 2. Yeah. He's got the length, he's got the athletic ability. I get it. But you're really relying on a lot of different players in that secondary. Now you bring back Jermaine Pratt, which I think is really, really good for them. I think Jermaine Pratt got a little bit overrated by some people who really wanted him in free agency. I think he's a good player, but not like amazing. Like not like
exactly.
Yeah. But the big thing really is that defensive line, right? Like the fact that they have BJ Hill and DJ Reader playing right next to each other is so difficult to contend with because those are two very large human beings who are very good at playing football. And you combine that with Trey Hendrickson, you combine that with who is Sam Hubbard, right? Who's been on that team for a long time. You bring in someone like Miles Murphy, who I wasn't a huge fan of, but kind of fits what they like in Cincinnati. So, there were worse spots for him to go to for sure, but I think that working in a rotation will be good for him. So I think if they're going to really find that same level of consistency on defense this year, it's going to be because of that front 7 really getting to work and really attacking things like they have been doing. But that secondary, it's a lot of question marks. And I'm not saying that it's going to be good. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. I'm saying it's question marks. Like you don't really know with certainty what you're getting with any of these guys because we just haven't seen them play a whole lot.
Right.
So we'll see what that adjustment period is going to be like for them. In fact, I'm going to very quickly look up what the first couple of games for them are going to be because that'll be interesting.
Right.
So,
is the secondary going to be tested straight away?
So the first game is against the Browns. So
interesting. Who we'll get into here next.
Then you have the Ravens, who have a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. And obviously they have OBJ, they have Rashad Bateman, they have Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson just got paid. You have Mark Andrews, right? Like that'll be an interesting test, and especially because it's kind of funny because like you have the Ravens who have a new offensive coordinator, and you have the Bengals who have a bunch of new defensive pieces.
Right.
That'll actually be kind of interesting. That's actually very interesting. But then you get the Rams, Titans, and Cardinals. So, it's going to be a nice. It'll be a tough first 2 weeks, I imagine. I think it'll be it's possible that the Browns are just kind of whatever, and maybe the nasty man isn't all that good. But the Ravens are the Ravens, and if the guys that they brought in are who we think they are, that could be a really, really interesting test for them. But I'm not banking on the Rams, Titans, or Cardinals to be anything or any sort of struggle or test for them. But it's the NFL, so who knows?
So I think that was a lot to say about the Bengals. Just to wrap it up, there's changes, but again, the core is the same. It's still Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon. On defense, they still have BJ Hill, DJ Reader, Jermaine Pratt, and Hendrickson. Yeah, they still have that returning cast. They're going to be a good team, presumably for a long time. If Mike Brown, that's the owner, right? If he decides like, hey, maybe I should spend some money and try to keep this core together. See, that's if I were a Bengals fan, that's what would be keeping me up at night. Like, I think they will, right? Because like they've all kind of talked in the past about like we'll take team friendly deals to keep this core together, but like that's
That's easy to say until, you start looking at those numbers and then you start looking at everyone else's numbers and it's tough. I was going to say something. What was I going to say? There's no way they're letting Joe Burrow out of that building.
No. And you'd focus on Jamar Chase before you'd focus on T. Higgins, but we'll see what happens. Roy Collins, right? Someone might want to let Judge and Joe know that their show's getting a late start.
Pretty sure this is how last year's tier list started too, so I'm not that concerned.
I'm very concerned because we're getting into our next team here. I'm just going to throw them here in tier 3 to start, but this is not where they're going to finish. This is one of like 2 or 3 teams where I was like, wow, like this team kind of is flying under the radar a little bit. Cleveland goes 7-10 last year. Replaced their defensive coordinator in the offseason. Bring in old friend Jim Schwartz. He is the new defensive play caller, defensive coordinator in Cleveland. They lose to F.A. Jadeveon Clowney. They cut John Johnson. Great name. They also lose Greedy Williams and Jacoby Brissett. And they bring in, through free agency, Dalvin Tomlinson, Tristan Hill, Juan Thornhill, and Matthew Adams. Those are their bigger name acquisitions. And then via trade, they acquire Elijah Moore, who the Jets weren't using. And they also get Zadarius Smith from the Vikings, correct? That's where he was?
That's right.
And then for a team that had not a lot of draft picks, the Browns had a hell of a draft. They draft Cedric Tillman, arguably the more, the Tennessee receiver in this year's draft that has a more pro-applicable or ready game, so to speak, straight away. Cedric Tillman, of course. And then they draft Siaka Ika and DeJuan Jones, Dorian Thompson Robinson, Luke Whippler. A fun draft for the Cleveland Browns. So again, as you said, David, when we were talking about the Bengals, this is really going to come down to what Deshaun Watson are they getting? Are they getting a world beater MVP caliber quarterback Deshaun Watson that was playing in Houston a couple of years ago? Or are they getting the Deshaun Watson that we saw last year, who wasn't very good?
Can I point out that we heard police sirens as soon as you said Deshaun Watson's name?
That's incredible. You're right. I timed it. I timed it perfectly. It was, See, when I muted my mic a couple of minutes ago, that's what I was doing. I called 911 and hung up so they would come to my house as soon as I was talking about Deshaun Watson. So we will be, I will be taken out of my house in handcuffs here momentarily, but we will finish our Cleveland Browns talk before then. Good bit, great bit. So yes, given this roster though, I don't think they need MVP caliber quarterback Deshaun Watson. They have surrounded him with a hell of an offense. He has so many weapons. He has Amari Cooper, who they got for nothing last year. Now he has Elijah Moore, who looked great when the Jets used him, and then they were like, we're not going to use you anymore. Again, they get him for peanuts. And they also have Cedric Tillman. Donovan Peoples-Jones is no slouch. Yeah. They have Nick Chubb, arguably the best pure runner in the NFL.
They have Marquise Goodwin, former Bill, who is somehow still in the league.
Yeah, no, they do have Marquise Goodwin. That is a player on the roster. And then you look at the defense. And they have Jim Schwartz now. And then you look at that front with Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson. Then you got Siaka Ika going to be plugging up holes. Again, I like the secondary as well. This is bold. I'm thinking they're tier 2.
Do it.
That's where I'm putting them.
Let's be spicy.
Like, I don't even need to project Deshaun Watson that much. I just need him to not be a bum. Well, not be a bum on the field. He's a bum off the field. I need him to not be a bum on the field, and Cleveland's going to be a good team.
Yeah. I mean, getting rid. The biggest thing that they needed to do, and it was so clear throughout the last couple of seasons, right? They had to get rid of Joe Woods. Yeah. That team had so many stupid breakdowns in the secondary. I mean, it felt like every time I watched the Browns, it was always 3 or 4 plays where secondary players were like, no, you had this, no, you had that, no, you had this. And it's just like, how is this happening in year 3 of this defense? Like, this can't keep happening. This is just bad. Yeah. So you bring in someone like Jim Schwartz, who has a very strong, well-known track record across a bunch of different organizations, right? Between his time in Tennessee with Jeff Fisher, Jim when he was the head coach in Detroit, in Buffalo as the DC, in Philadelphia as the DC. Like, he's got plenty of success. There's times where he's a little too simple. I think he struggles to adjust his defense when things are getting hit a lot. But you know what? He's going to absolutely raise the floor of this defense to a much higher level. And having an actual like defensive line outside of Myles Garrett also helps with that as well. I think that this team could be a real threat. But like you said, a lot of it is going to depend on the nasty man and what he's able to do, because obviously when Deshaun Watson was in Houston, MVP caliber quarterback, world beater type of player, those last couple of games in Cleveland to end the season, it wasn't just like, oh, he's like got some timing issues and stuff like that. It's more like, yeah, this dude really hasn't played professional football in a long time, and it shows. Now, you have a full offseason. You've had time to adjust to this offense, to learn the playbook, all that wonderful stuff. But like you said, I mean, there's kind of really no excuse for this team unless Deshaun Watson just is that.
Right.
Which would be, objectively speaking, the funniest outcome.
Yes, it would be incredible.
That they have built such a good team that just gets wasted because they made the worst decision in football. And, I mean, that would be objectively funny.
It'd be the most Browns thing ever. Browns is the Browns.
There is something that I kind of want to talk about with the Browns, that
how they should start Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
No. But yeah, we could try that. So their offensive line, right? Like, we kind of have sort of taken it as like, oh, right, the Browns have a great offensive line because they have, Wyatt Teller. They've got, they drafted Jedrick Wills 10th, in the top 10. They've got, who is it? Ethan Pochik. They've got, who is it? Joel Petonio, right? He's great. And it's like, okay, but like, is Jedrick Wills actually good? Because
good on Madden. That's what everyone. That's how people judge offensive line. What's his Madden overall?
That I don't know what it is, but like, I feel like if Jedrick Wills was good, like, we would probably hear about it a little bit more. I mean, he was taken into the top 10, and I don't know. I feel like my just impression, just sort of based on what little I have seen, is like, he's kind of mid, I guess, maybe above average. And when you're getting one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL and Bill Callahan to coach you up and you're only kind of mid, okay, all right. I mean, there's worse. There's worse than just being a mid left tackle, that's for sure. But like, I don't know. I think that, that. Who is their right tackle? I'm trying to.
I could not tell you off the top of my head.
Fair enough. Okay. Oh, right. Jack Conklin. They did re-sign Jack Conklin. And Jack Conklin has had injury history, right? Like, he had problems last year. He's had problems in Tennessee. So I don't know. I think it's possible that this offensive line just like maybe isn't quite the unit that we sort of assume they are. And Deshaun Watson is not unfamiliar with the idea of playing with a bad offensive line, right? That was part of the big narrative in Houston with him. But I do think that it will obviously affect how they run the ball, which is a major part of that Stefanski wide zone type of offense, right? So it's just something to think about, just something to think like, okay,
keep your eye out.
Just keep your eye out. And then, of course, special teams. The Browns haven't had a good kicker since Phil Dawson. And, like, they drafted Cade York in the 4th round last year, which is a very interesting decision when you take into account that their GM is supposed to be this big, like, analytical dude, right? Like, super into analytics.
Right.
Very interesting. But I think Cade York has a lot of potential. But I think he kind of was up and down a bit last year. We'll see. We'll see if that happens. We'll see if that works out for them.
Okay. So yes, Cleveland, as of now, they'll probably end up near the bottom of this tier, I would say. But as of right now, they are in the cream of the crop tier, or not the cream of the crop, not quite cream of the crop, but still very good. Yeah. Moving on to Denver. Again, just putting them in tier 3 to start. Doubt that's where they'll end up, though it very well may be. Very interesting team. They could end up in a number of different tiers. Okay, last season. Oh boy, there could be movies and books and everything made about the 2022 Denver Broncos, and they would be proofread in Russell Wilson's office that he no longer has. They go 5-12 last year. Sean Payton, of course, replaces not Nat Hackett because Nat Hackett had been replaced by an interim, but Sean Payton is brought in the offseason to become the new head coach. No real key free agent losses, to be honest with you. They do sign Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, Zach Allen, and Samaje Perine comes over from Cincinnati to presumably spell Javonte Williams from time to time as he recovers from his ACL injury. We'll see when he comes back, whenever. In the draft, again, don't have a lot of draft capital because they gave it all away for Russell Wilson. And they draft Marvin Mims, who I love Marvin Mims, love this, Boomer Sooner, but I don't know how he factors in. They got another KJ Hamler. Like, what are they don't use KJ Hamler? They just got a new one. Like, what is going on? We'll get into the receiving core here in a second. But then also in the draft, they get Drew Sanders, Riley Moss, and JL Skinner. Those are kind of their marquee additions in the draft. So the storylines for the Broncos this year, they are, will Russ cook or will he continue to be cooked? Is Javonte healthy? And if, to me, Javonte Williams is a guy that, look, he's shown flashes. Do not get me wrong. Javonte Williams has shown flashes. But to me, it's always been just he's going to be really good. Mm-hmm. But it's never been he is really good. Oh no,
after a certain point you got to play the cards, and if they're not good, they're not good. That's just how it is,
right? To be fair, in his defense, he was a rookie. He was splitting snaps with Melvin Gordon, just kind of getting spot duty here and there, spelling, complimentary back, if you will. And then last year he's supposed to take the reins. They bring Melvin Gordon back, and then they also then he tears his ACL. Javonte does. So again, there's a lot of questions because we've never seen Javonte Williams be what Javonte Williams is supposed to be. Plus he's coming off a big injury. So we'll see how he rebounds, but they bring in Perine. So we'll see if that running game is anything. But then the receiving core, is this receiving core ever going to be what it was supposed to be? Right, it's never been when they draft Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler that year to complement with Cortland Sutton. It was this team's going to have an elite receiving core for the next 5 or 6 years. It's never been that, right? Right. Jerry Jeudy had a good half of his last season here, and he looked really good, finally looking like the player that he was supposed to be. But he's been that first round best receiver, not even the best receiver out of that class that he was supposed to be, but he's been top tier receiver border. Or he wasn't even that, though. That's the thing, is this team is just full of underachieving all over.
Yeah.
And again, I love the idea of their receiving core. I like Marvin Mims a lot. I like KJ Hamler. I like Jerry Jeudy, but they fooled me too many times. They're giving me a brain aneurysm. They are fooling me. They have fooled me too many times to buy into that receiving core and to buy into this team in general, to be honest. And again, you look at the defense. I like a lot of the players. I like Randy Gregory. I like Pat Surtain. Very good corner. I like Justin Simmons. But there's just so many question marks. Is Russ done? Can the receiving core be the receiving core it's supposed to be? How does Javonte look? How do all these pieces look on a Sean Payton team and a Sean Payton offense? Does the defense, that's always been a given with Denver, was the defense. The defense is going to be great. Can they figure it out offensively? Is that defense going to be as good this year? I don't know. So I genuinely don't know where to put them.
So I'll briefly talk about defense, because defense was great last year. But that defense coordinator was Ejiro Evero, who is now in Carolina. And now they bring in Vance Joseph, who just a couple of years ago was head coach of this team. And Vance Joseph is one of these, I don't know how much Arizona Cardinals football you watched. Hopefully not a lot.
No.
But he is definitely one of these live by the blitz, die by the blitz types of coaches. And that's fine when it works. But that's tough. That's tough. And like, you brought up that they brought in Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey, who are like above average.
Good, but like not what they're paying them.
So much money on those two. Yeah. Mike McGlinchey got what, like a $87 million deal?
And again, this is an asset-strapped team as it is. This is a team that, is not in the best cap situation. This is a team that doesn't have that much draft capital. And they're interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, I will say, I think Sean Payton will be better than Nate Hackett because it's really, really hard to be worse.
Yeah.
But is that enough to lift this team above a Chargers team? Is it enough to maybe split the series between the Chiefs? Is it enough to get you that last wild card spot in the AFC, or just a wild card spot in the AFC? I don't know. I think that if you're asking me to rank this team right now, which is what we're doing, I would say right where they are. These teams will go 8-8 if that were still a thing.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, this is a team that I was considering. I wrote down here, they're either tier 3 or tier 5 because, like, we're going to end up putting them here just because I do think with Sean Payton, I think they are going to end up hovering around that 500 mark.
They'll at least be more watchable. I mean, God, last year that was when they got annihilated by the Rams.
Yeah.
With that roster, I mean, that was when you just knew it was like, oh my gosh, there's no coming back from this. And the Broncos knew it too because they fired Nate Hackett right after that.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be a good team. They're just going to be a middling team with a questionable future. And that's kind of, I think, if you're a Broncos fan, I think that's what you have to go into this season looking for is just hope, right? Like, I hope Sean Payton is building the foundation of something that he can expand upon in later years. I don't think this is your year, especially in this AFC, as you're going to find out. It's a very talented, very good AFC. This is not a team. This is not a year where the Broncos can make noise, I don't think. And again, like I would listen. I would listen to any of these tiers. Like if you like Jerry Jeudy, if you like Cortland Sutton, if you like Javonte Williams, if you still like Russ, right? If you like Sean Payton, you could, admit that they're not going to be great, but they're going to be fun. Or if you think, if you look at their draft capital and you're like, this team doesn't have much of a future, but no, we'll put them there. They're just going to be middling all around.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to LA. Again, just putting them here for now. That's not where they'll end up, I'm sure. Last season, they go 10-7, right? They do make the playoffs, finally get over that hump, and they lose still in Chargers fashion in the wild card round to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a hell of a comeback there in free agency. They lose Drew Tranquil, Bryce Callahan, and Kyle Van Noy. Eric Kendricks is really their only, I guess, free agent acquisition of note. Coming in.
A good one.
A really good one, right? Coming in to replace Drew Tranquil. And then in the draft, they get Quentin Johnston, Tuli Puloto, Diane Henley, and Darius Davis, a fun kind of offensive gadget player, if you will. So where we rank them and where anyone ranks them is going to come down to anyone's personal opinion on Kellen Moore and Quentin Johnston, right? Like, do you think that Quentin Johnston is enough to lift this middling, aging wide receiver core and to be, enough for Justin Herbert to work with? We have sirens again. I don't think Justin Herbert's ever been to jail.
Not yet.
No, you know who should go to jail? Staley, right? Like that's who should go to jail for wasting Justin Herbert. But no. So yes, if you like Kellen Moore, if you think Kellen Moore is a better offensive coordinator than Joe Lombardi, which I do, but I don't know if that's saying much, right? Like I think Kellen Moore is going to open the playbook a little bit beyond 1 or 2 plays. But like I don't know if he moves the needle enough for me to think that the Chargers are an exponentially better team. I personally am not that big of a fan of Quentin Johnston, right? He was not in my tier 1 of wide receivers in this year's class, and they took him among those names.
It's funny that the Chargers took Quentin Johnston because when you think about what he does, is he not like pretty similar to what Mike Williams does for that team? It just sort of feels a little redundant for them. I will say, though, I think Kellen Moore is going to be a very, very big upgrade for this team. I think Kellen Moore has been overhated by Cowboys fans. I think he's a really smart offensive coordinator. I think he's very creative. But my concern is more about this defense. They have spent a lot of money on this defense. And last year it didn't really show up until later in the season. And I'm not 100% sure why, because like late in the season, you started to see a lot of really great game plans from the Chargers. But it was like, okay, so what was going on those first like 2 months, right? Like, why are we waiting until later in the season to get these great game plans from Staley, who I think can obviously put these together? And maybe it was just a matter of Staley taking over more duties and being a little bit more hands-on with the defense than he was early on in the season. I don't know. There's a lot of there's not good vibes from this team because it's the Chargers, right? Like that's part of it. It's just like, you know, we keep every year it feels like, oh, this is going to be the time the Chargers really make it work and they become the team, right? And it's just like we keep getting suckered in. And it's just like I can't bring myself to do it this time. I think that they will be fine. I think that where they are right now is probably fine, right? Team that will go 8.
They're better than the Broncos.
Right? That's fair. I feel more confident week to week about the Chargers than I do about the Broncos.
Right.
Also, they do have Cameron Dicker as their kicker, and
nice.
I love Dicker the kicker. So
nice.
I just wanted to bring that up. That's all.
And yeah, again, you talk about their defense, right? You talk about it didn't really gel until the end of the year, but again, they have names. Nick Bosa, super good. Khalil Mack, you know, UB horns up, if you will. This is horns up. There you go. Derwin James, Asante Samuel. Derwin James, when he's healthy, is a game record, but it's just a matter of staying on the field with him. But yeah, like again, it's the Austin Eckler question marks. Like he requested a trade, and they have Isaiah Spiller behind him, but I wasn't that big of an Isaiah Spiller guy either. So like we'll see what happens there. The receiving core, again, they have dudes who I like lower down the depth chart, but I'm not a big Quentin Johnston guy. Never was a big Mike Williams guy. Keenan Allen, I liked him at his peak, but he's on the older side now.
We're 10 years later on Keenan Allen. Like it's tough.
Like again, we reserve the right to, you know, based on how the tier list shakes out, maybe we'll go later and we'll move the Chargers up. But as of right now, no, I'm fine with the Chargers here. I don't think they are a top tier contender.
Yeah.
Even if they do have Justin Herbert, who was great. You know, we'll see how he gels with Kellen Moore and how he gels with Quentin Johnston. But as of right now, as of May 22nd, I don't think that they are a tier 1 or 2 contender. Kansas City, speaking of tier 1 and tier 2 contenders, they are cream of the crop right up there. There we go.
Yep.
Yes, that's the only place to put the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. They go 14-3 last year, win the Super Bowl, of course. They do lose Orlando Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Andrew Wiley, Juan Thornhill, Mecole Hardman, Kalen Saunders, right? They lose some guys in free agency, but they're the Chiefs. They replace in, you know, how they sign Jawan Taylor from the Jags, Charles Omenihu, Drew Tranquil from the Chargers. Richie James, very under the radar signing from the Chargers, from the Chiefs, bringing in Richie James from the Giants. Also, Donovan Smith, who might start a tackle for them. And just like,
Yeah.
well, it's interesting. But again, at the end of the day, right, like we can talk about their free agent moves, their free agent losses, acquisitions, talk about their draft. Felix, can you pronounce his name?
Hold on, I gotta look at it. Hang on.
Anudike Uzoma. Anudike?
I gotta just.
I think it's Anudike. Yes, Felix Anudike Uzoma.
Anudike Uzoma.
Yes,
something like that.
Rasheed
People
Rice,
just call him FAU. So
FAU. Oh, Lane Kiffin. They drafted Lane Kiffin.
Wow.
Rasheed Rice, who I didn't love, not a lot of people like, but when the Chiefs got him, people were like, maybe I was wrong. Maybe they're like, which is funny, which might be right? Like Rasheed Rice might come out here and be insane, but based off of tape, I don't know. Wanya Morris, also another draft pick, but at the end of the day, as Lowe writes here, as long as they have Mahomes and Reed and Travis Kelce, that's all you need. That's all at the end of the day. Right.
I the very first note that I had is Mahomes, Andy Reid. What else is there to say? But there are some things to talk about. So like the wide receiver room, right? There's no one in that wide receiver room where I'm like, oh yeah, you got to be ready for that.
See,
you've got Marcus Scantling, who is fine. You've got Sky Moore, who is unproven. You have Rasheed Rice, who is a rookie. You bring up Richie James, sure, that's fine, but like, I don't know. I'm kind of hard pressed to be like outside of Travis Kelce. No, I'm sorry. I'm not buying this.
We are on opposite ends. No, Kadarius Toney is going to be insane.
Based on what?
Based off of the 2 games that he's played in and has been fully healthy in his career, dude's been insane.
No.
Yeah, no, he's got to stay on the field. Right. There's a big question mark, and the issue is, can he stay on the field?
Kyle, without looking it up.
Okay.
How many catches did Kadarius Toney have last year?
Oh, probably like 4.
Close. 14.
He did better than I thought. Thank you, Kadarius. You're even better than I thought you were. No, he's going to be good. Again, this is one of the
I've been hearing that Kadarius Toney is going to be good, and then he just isn't. So what am I supposed to think here?
Okay, RJ, Andy Reid can scheme me open. I want Reid to retire
with that.
And then Low. I think Tony's going to thrive in Andy Reid's scheme.
I agree with that.
You are giving one of the craziest players. Like, have you watched him move? He moves like a marionette, just like how his body is pulled, how he can contort his body. And then you're giving him to Andy Reid?
And then he pulls another muscle because that's what he does.
That is true. This is all fair. We're both right. As at the end of the day, neither of us.
One of us is more right than the other, and that's me. But that's okay.
No, I think again, Kadarius Toney, if he stays healthy, dude's going to, in KC, is going to do some damage, and he's why he and Richie James are kind of. And I also like Sky Moore, so like that's why I look at their weapons plus Travis Kelce, and I'm like, plus Mahomes and Reed, I'm not concerned about their weapons. They're going to figure it out because that's what they do. But like
the other aspect of this offense in particular, I could kind of wrap up the defense in one sort of 2 sentences. Is the defense good? Not really. Can they put together good games against actual opponents? Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
But with the offense, okay, so their tackle situation is very odd. Can we talk about
very
this?
Odd. They gave Jawan Taylor a lot of money to play right tackle, presumably. That's what he does.
Is he playing right tackle?
If they
that's
gave
a lot
him
of money to give to a right tackle, which kind of implies that maybe they're putting him at left tackle, because if they don't, they're either playing Wanya Morris or Donovan Smith at left tackle, and neither of those are guys that I would trust.
But I mean, Jawan Taylor, that was always the thing with Jawan Taylor is dude's a right tackle. He got drafted high to be a right tackle. Like he was a second round pick as a right tackle. Like I think that they are fine with him being a right tackle because he is, that's what he is. And I don't know. Like, yes, they did give him a lot of money, but that's always been his thing, right? Like he's always kind of doing things not expected of a right tackle, I guess. But like, I'm this is a lot of time to talk about the Chiefs who are, tier 1. There's really nothing else to say. And we are already an hour deep.
That's fair.
But yeah,
I'm just confused by the tackle situation.
It is confusing, right? Like, but again, the Chiefs, they did this last year too, where they had a lot of holes. They traded Tyreek Hill, and it was like, how are they going to replace this?
But they also brought in Juju Smith-Schuster, who we had seen has been good in the past. Like and Juju Smith played well for them last year. But they also had Orlando Brown, who wasn't always the best scheme fit for them, but also was just baseline pretty solid. So Donovan Smith is not baseline pretty solid. Donovan Smith is at best solid. This is somebody who could be a genuine problem for them. Unless they start Jawan Taylor at left tackle, which I don't think they want to do. Because it doesn't make any sense. But neither does starting Donovan Smith or Wanye Morris. So what are we doing here?
It's gonna be
none of it's gonna matter. They weren't gonna win the fucking Super Bowl anyway.
Exactly, right? We'll be doing this again next year, and we'll be like, oh, we had question marks, but they won the fucking Super Bowl. Okay, Indy's up next. Just throwing them here for now. Again, another interesting team. Another one of these teams where I thought I was gonna put them in one tier. Looked into them a little bit, and I'm like, maybe they're maybe they're in a different tier than I thought they were. Last season, they go 4-12-1, and then they keep up that stupid cycle that they have going with the Eagles, where they just trade offensive coordinators as head coaches every couple of years. Hire Shane Steichen. Is that how you pronounce it? Who cares?
Yes.
They lose Bobby Okereke in free agency. Also, Brandon, how do you pronounce that? Facyson.
Fashion?
Okay, that. Paris Campbell, Yannick Ngakoue is still a free agent. And they signed Samson Ebukam, Taven Bryan, who, one of my favorite draft stories, right? I remember we got J.J. Watt comps, before the draft. I was like, oh, okay. And, that's how I remember Taven Bryan. It's just oh, he's not that. Also signed a friend of the show, fan favorite, Isaiah McKenzie is in Indy now. And then in the draft, they made 12 draft picks in this draft.
Yeah.
And again, Anthony Richardson is a big swing, but I think will be a home run. I think way too talented, and I think this system's really going to work for him. Also get Julius Brents, also get Josh Downs, one of my draft guys, Blake Freeland, who is Spencer Brown, added Tomiwa, Adebayor, the Northwestern guy, right? The freaky Northwestern pass rusher. That's all you need to know. I don't know how to pronounce his name, sadly. This is a fun team. This is a really fun and exciting young team that had a really fun offseason in which they added more talented youth to what was already a very talented young core that included Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Quentin Nelson, and then on defense they have DeForest Buckner, Shaq Leonard, Kenny Moore, who's a fun nickel corner, one of the best nickels in the league, and then you got Kwity Paye, who maybe hasn't quite lived up to that draft hype a couple of years ago, but again, is still a talented player. I was going to say this team will be bad but fun, right? Just given everything, given we don't know how Jonathan Taylor is going to recover from that high ankle sprain, right? It took Saquon a couple of years to get right after that. And just look, they have a lot of guys in the receiving core, but they're all young. And they have Anthony Richardson, who could be really good, but again, he's a raw project, and we'll see. We saw how that worked in year one with Josh Allen, right? A lot of flashes, but not necessarily a lot of wins. But I don't know. There's a lot on this team that I think they could be pushing 500 this year.
So there's more talent than I think people realize on this team.
Yeah.
The Shane Steichen is great fit for Anthony Richardson, I think. And Anthony Richardson, he got labeled as a project, and I kind of get it. I don't think he's quite the project that everyone kind of labeled him as. I think in that division where the Titans are kind of a question mark and the Texans are still rebuilding, it's possible some things just kind of go their way and maybe they get a little spicy and, are kind of in contention for a playoff spot, maybe. I'm not saying it would be pretty amazing if they made the playoffs, though.
Oh, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I just think they're going to be too good to say they're going to be bad, if that makes sense. Like, they're going to be fun.
I get that.
Like, I don't think we're going to look back a year from now and say this was a bad football team. I don't think that's something that we're going to do.
But so based on how you have framed these tiers, right? The vibes of these teams who go 8-8 if that were still a thing kind of lends itself to like, this isn't all that interesting to watch. Whereas bad but fun teams are really a lot of fun to watch.
Okay, you're right.
I think that it's likely that this team goes 7-10, has a lot of fun games, some shootouts, what have you, but they're just not quite there yet, right? Like they're just not quite all the way there yet. But I think that they're going to be bad, not terrible, but also fun.
Right, and then as RJ writes here, that team is 2 seasons removed from being a contender when they lost to the Bills game in the wild card game. And then if you remember the next season, like they lose to the Bills with Rivers, and then the next season they were just like stacked, right? They were coming, not necessarily stacked, but like heading down the last couple of weeks of the season when they were getting hot, and it was just like, you do not want to run into the Colts in the playoffs. Like that is the one team you do not want to face in the playoffs. They ended up not making the playoffs at all because of, week 17 or 18 hijinks or whatever. But again, and then last year happens, everything implodes. I think that's a fair ranking. I think these teams will be bad, but fun this team will be bad, but fun. That's fair for them. But again, much better vibes than the Chargers, much better vibes than the Broncos.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a better future for this team than there are for those other two teams. That's for sure.
Anthony Richardson, dude's going to be a stud. I've been saying that for months on this podcast. I said he was one of my guys. Like after week or before the season, I said Anthony Richardson was my guy. Okay, Miami. It pains me. Miami pains me. Just putting it in here for now. This one's going to be painful. Last season they go 9-8. They lose at the wild card to Buffalo. Of course, the Bills. They bring in Vic Fangio to call defensive plays. Vic Fangio, notoriously a pretty good defensive or historically a pretty good defensive coordinator. They acquire Jalen Ramsey from the Rams. Say what you will about Jalen Ramsey, his history against the Bills. Jalen Ramsey is a pretty good defensive back. They lose Elandon Roberts, Mike Gesicki, Trent Sherfield, and Byron Jones. They sign David Long, pretty underrated linebacker. Get Mike White, Braxton Berrios, and Dan Feeney. And then in the draft, again, kind of a team that's weird in terms of capital, just given the whole tampering stuff from last year. But they come out of the draft with Cam Smith and Devin Achane. Devin Achane is a player that his size, he's like 5'9", 180 some odd pounds. His size would concern me if he were drafted by any other team besides Miami, but he goes to literally the perfect situation. This is a track star that is joining a track team on offense with a offensive play caller and offensive play designer in Mike McDaniel, who can get running back production out of anybody, and you give him somebody as potentially dynamic as Devin Achane. As a Bills fan, as a football fan, love the fit. As a Bills fan, don't like the fit. Do not like them getting a player like that. And again, the questions are going to come down to, can Tua stay on the field? With his whole concussion history, which unfortunately is a thing at this point. That defense on paper, is scary, especially with Vic Fangio. But again, a front including Christian Wilkins, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb. Then you got Jerome Baker and David Long, two rangy linebackers manning the middle of the field. And then you've got a secondary with Jalen Ramsey, Javon Holland, and then Xavier Howard, who isn't what Xavier Howard used to be. But again, he's still a player like this. They're good. They are a really good football team. They were good last year. They got better in the offseason. To me, they are either here or here.
I'm very comfortable with putting them at the top of that, not quite cream of the crop.
Okay.
Because of two, I have two questions with this team, right? The first is, this offensive line is still a problem, right? It was a problem last year. It's a problem this year because all they did to fix it was sign Dan Feeney, who isn't a fix for anything. But, they're relying on Connor Williams, who wasn't good for them last year. Austin Jackson, I think, is still starting for them. That's a problem. Teron Armstead, when he's healthy, is a genuine game-changing player for them. But the problem is, at this point of his career, he's going to miss, at least 3 games, maybe 5, like he did last year and the year before and the year before. That's kind of just who he is at this point. It's unfortunate. So I think that's a big question mark. And it's always going to be tough for me to believe in a team that has a lot of questions at offensive line, right? This is sort of what, in my mind, kind of keeps the Bills from leapfrogging the Bengals right now, because there's still a big question at right tackle on whether Spencer Brown is actually going to be that type of guy, and they have no depth behind him. By the way, our good friend, Sports Rock, Ryan Sullivan, wrote an article about Spencer Brown out today. Go take a look at it, cover1.football.
Company man.
Hey, I'm just trying to pay the bills here, man. So with the Dolphins, it's not just one position though; it's a couple different positions, and they seem comfortable with guys that just aren't very good, and that's a problem. Now you bring up Xavier Howard, and that's interesting because they have Kader Kohu, who seems to be set at nickel. They also still have Nick Needham, who has been a starting nickel corner for them in the past and been very good for them. They draft Cam Smith in the second round, who is a good player who some people had mocked to the Bills in the first round for some reason. I never really understood that.
I like the player, but no, thank you.
Yeah. They trade for Jalen Ramsey, who obviously is going to be starting for them. So where does Xavier Howard kind of end up here? Because was it last year where he wanted to hold out for more money?
If not last year, it was in the recent past. Yeah, so
right.
Relatively recently.
So, speaking of relatively recently, Brian Flores was his head coach. Brian Flores is now the defensive coordinator in Minnesota. Who has Dalvin Cook on the trading block, and Miami has been linked to Dalvin Cook quite a bit.
I mean, fine, go for it. I don't care.
And that's the thing, right? It's they've been teasing this trade with Dalvin Cook, but there's kind of a reason why Minnesota's okay with getting rid of Dalvin Cook.
Right,
Dalvin Cook still has something in the tank, but he's not the Dalvin Cook that they're paying for right now. That's the thing.
Exactly.
And, the thing with Xavier Howard is not necessarily that he doesn't have anything left. I think he still has something left, but he's also a very up and down corner just with the style of his play. And, you have 2 guys that can legitimately start for you in Cam Smith, who a lot of people like. You also have Jalen Ramsey. It kind of seems like Xavier Howard's the odd man out here. And if a team like Minnesota's like, hey, we need corners, and they do need corners, especially if you're going to be running a Brian Flores defense, he's got familiarity in that defense. This to me just seems like a very obvious trade. I don't know if it's a straight up 1-for-1 type of trade. I'd be surprised if it were, but I would keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Again, I don't even know if I would want them to get Dalvin Cook. Like, not even from a Bills fan's perspective, just like
Sure.
10,000-foot view, right? You look at what they have: Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Devin A-Chain. Just like you bring in, is Dalvin Cook that much of a
marks, right? Like Mostert has injury problems, and
well, Dalvin Cook's a question mark too, though. Like he's a little bit less of a question mark, but he's not again the game record that he used to be. It's a question mark of
but
which
I feel
Dalvin
like
are you getting?
I don't think it is a question about what Dalvin you're getting. I think you know what Dalvin Cook you're getting. It's just that
Is his
it's not
shoulder
the
going to stay
Dalvin.
healthy?
I personally would feel more comfortable with Dalvin Cook and A Shane,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you keep Mostert in the mix, or maybe you hang him out as trade bait as well. I don't know, but I would feel more comfortable with Dalvin Cook if I were a Dolphins fan. But that's also with the caveat that like you are paying him a lot of money, and I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable about that. But I would have to look at that contract to see like, is there an easy out after a year or two? How long do I have to really keep Dalvin Cook? All those sorts of questions. But I think Dalvin Cook, the player, I feel more comfortable with overall than pretty much anyone else on that roster, running back wise.
Moving on, Jacksonville Jaguars. Oh, this one's gonna hurt. This one's gonna hurt me a little bit just because I was singing their praises all last year. We would do vibe checks, and I always brought up the Jags. Before the Jags were even on their turnaround, I was like, "Oh, Trevor Lawrence is looking good. Ooh, ETN's looking good." Right? Like, ooh, I was I was sounding like Mr. Meeseeks from the Rick and Morty series. I was going crazy over the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And logic would tell you they're going to be somewhere up here, right? Like you look at what they did in year one under Doug Peterson, 9-8, losing in the divisional round to KC after they beat the Chargers in the wild card round. And again, you look at their offense, right? Trevor Lawrence in year three, Travis Etienne in, second year back from that ACL tear, actually second year in the league because he missed his entire rookie year. And again, they're bringing in Calvin Ridley, right? And like defensively, that young defense is going to be another year older, Trayvon Walker, right? Is that the name? Yes, there we go.
Trayvon Walker.
I got it first try. Maybe the most irrelevant number one overall pick in recent memory. But yeah, Trayvon Walker. It's weird, but just like yes, and then Josh Allen also, and then they also get Devin Lloyd last year. Chad Muma, we'll see if he has more of a role. Like again, logic would tell you, right? Like they were good last year. They found their footing as the season went on, looked good, and they are going to improve as this team ages, but looking at the team, they lose Jawan Taylor, they lose Arden Key, they lose former Canisius Golden Griffin Chris Manhertz, lose Shaq Griffin. No real big free agent acquisitions unless you want offseason acquisitions.
Because they spent all their money last year. Right,
obviously.
They overspent on everyone last year, so they can't afford anyone this year. I think the roster overall is fine. Right. And especially since you add Calvin Ridley to the mix here.
Right. Yeah.
I think that totally changes the dynamic of your passing game. Because they got a legitimately good season from Christian Kirk that I was not expecting. They even got a good season from Zay Flowers. Now you move both of those guys down. Christian Kirk is your legitimate number 2. You have Zay Flowers as your number 3. You have Calvin Ridley number 1. That changes everything for your offense. This is so much better now. This is just, it's like taking, hold on. Let me clarify this. It is not on the level of bringing in Stephon Diggs to the 2020 Bills, but it's going to have a similar effect, right? Where it's like, yes, John Brown was a very good receiver for the Bills in 2019. Cole Beasley was a very good receiver for the Bills in 2019, but neither of them were legitimate true number ones. Stephon Diggs was that guy. Calvin Ridley can be that guy. Not on Diggs' level, obviously. Again, that's not what I'm saying. But Ridley will open things up for them. He will make catches that, like, legitimate number ones are going to be able to do. He's going to allow Christian Kirk more opportunities to get open. He's going to allow Doug Peterson more opportunities to get everyone else open. Like, it changes that dynamic of the offense a lot. Now, I agree. Losing Jawan Taylor, big deal. because he is a legitimately good right tackle. And when you look at that defense, you brought up, Trayvon Walker, Devin Lloyd, Chad Muma. Lloyd and Walker in particular were their first round picks last year, and they didn't really do much.
Right.
And if they want that defense, if they want that defense to do something, both of those guys are going to have to make some sort of leap next year. It doesn't need to be exponential, but it's got to be something where you're getting something out of these dudes. And yeah, I was not a huge Trayvon Walker guy, obviously. But you gotta get something out of this dude. You just have to. There's no two ways about it. You took a dude number 1 overall, and so far it hasn't mattered that much. So you gotta hope this dude turns into something. Even like a Jadeveon Clowney type of dude would be worthwhile, but you kind of hope he's something better than that.
Yeah. It's so hard for me because like I was on the Jags I can't talk. I was on the Jags bandwagon quite early last year, and now is not the time to jump off. I'm telling myself now is not the time to jump off the bandwagon. But I look at this team, and I'm just like I like Doug Peterson a lot. I like Trevor Lawrence a lot. I like Etienne. I like their draft a lot. They had 13 picks. Anton Harrison, Boomer, Brenton Strange, Tank Bigsby, who again, I think, look, I'm a big Etienne guy. I'm kind of nervous about Etienne a little bit, given Tank Bigsby, right? Like he is a potential 3-down back, can do a little bit of everything, right? Like this is a dude who is no slouch. Also get Parker Washington late in the draft. I am excited to see what Doug Peterson is going to do with a guy like Parker Washington. I'm just like, look, the recent, like looking at last year, is it sustainable? Is this something that they are going to just replicate and build upon? Or like, did Christian Kirk just have a really good year in the same year that Zay Jones had a really good year, in the same year that Evan Ingram had a really good year, right? Like was it all coincidental or is it sustainable? I guess that's my question. And as people are saying in the chat, right? Like, they almost have to be in this tier just given the nature of their division, right? Like they can be what I'm saying. They can be an above average, not great team and still win their division. And, just by nature of how the playoffs are structured, win a game in the playoffs and they're a contender, if you will. So like, I think bottom of tier 2, just again, given the division that they're in, is fair. I'm hesitant. I love them. I love a lot of their players. I love what they've done thus far. I'm hesitant that this is their year.
Fair enough.
Okay. We only have 40 minutes left, so we do have to speed it up a little bit. And unfortunately, we have hit the team that it is, we're going to have a lot to talk about. New York Jets. Okay. Last season they go 7-10. Of course, we were talking about the Jets all last year because I think we said like they were a quarterback away. They're the team that is best positioned in the AFC East to eventually challenge the Bills, not eventually usurp, so to speak, or necessarily, but in a very good position to challenge the Bills. They lose Nathan Shepard, Sheldon Rankins, Nate Herbig, Mike White, Braxton Berrios, Dan Feeney, and then they trade Elijah Moore to the Browns, as we talked about before. They sign Alan Lazard. Wonder why they did that. They signed Randall Cobb. Wonder why they did that. Also signed Mecole Hardman, Wes Schweitzer. That's a great German name. And then they also got what's his name?
Aaron Judge.
Rodgers. Right. Okay. Yes. Aaron Rodgers is the dude they get from the Packers, I believe. Yes. Give up a lot of draft capital to get Aaron Rodgers. I think he's 38, 39 years old. Maybe they gave up a first or second round pick. Who knows? And then in the draft, they trade down in the Rodgers trade. Eventually get Will McDonald. Will McDonald had a farm. Get Joe Tippmann at good value. Carter Warren. Israel Abanikanda there late in the draft. Very fun player out of Pitt, but again, they have a crowded backfield. So yeah, the question is like, look, they have a lot of fun dudes, right? But it's just like, Breece Hall. What can he bring to that offense immediately? You look at their weapons, dude, they got weapons. I'm not a big Allen Lazard guy, but again, he's your wide receiver too. You also got Garrett Wilson, who I think like is a future top 5 receiver in the NFL. Maybe as early as this year, Garrett Wilson gets into top 5 talk in the NFL. Dude, is just reminds me a lot of Stephon Diggs, to be honest, a very good player. And again, Randall Cobb, the ghost of Randall Cobb, but just like defensively, Jermaine Johnson, that's his name, right? The dude who they picked in the first round last year out of Florida State. Was that his last name?
Yeah.
Didn't do much last year. I did sack Josh Allen, but again, does he take a leap? Sauce Gardner, does he continue his ascension into he's already an elite quarterback talk. But again, like this team, there's a lot to like. It's just a matter of how quickly are they able to put it all together? How quickly are they able to put it all together with Nat Hackett calling the plays? Interesting. I don't know. It's interesting. It's I don't know where to put them, David.
I think I'm willing to put them ahead of the Jags. Ahead of the Jags and behind the Browns. Because I feel a little bit better about the Browns roster overall than I do about the Jets. So like the Jets had a great defense last year. And it was a great defense that didn't rely on getting a bunch of turnovers, right? Which is very interesting because turnovers have not entirely randomized, but it's largely randomized, right? Like there are just times where you're not going to get a ton of turnovers as a defense. You might even get like very few turnovers as a defense. And there's going to be times where you get a lot of turnovers as a defense and also score a lot on defense. Patriots. And oftentimes that regresses from year to year, or it varies year to year rather. With the Jets, I mean, they got really, really good defensive play without relying on a bunch of turnovers. However, what they did rely on was elite level cornerback play from Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. DJ Reed was a very good corner for them last year. The odds of them getting that level of play from both of those guys, again, at a position that is very volatile year to year, doesn't seem likely. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's unlikely. I feel more confident about Sauce Gardner being good again than I am about DJ Reed being good again. And the other part of this is not a team with a good safety. This is a team with a big question mark at safety. They took Ashton Davis a couple of years ago in the 3rd round. Is the guy that they got from the Seahawks and the Jamal Adams trade still there? I don't even remember his name.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't remember his name. I don't think he's still there though. Looking at
so
their
safety's
depth chart
kind
earlier,
of safety's not a strength of this team. You look at this is objectively a better team than it was last year because I think the quarterback will be better than what they had last year.
Bold take.
Look, I don't believe in Aaron Rodgers taking them to the promised land or anything like that because he's 40 years old and is just a freaking hippie. But like he's still going to be better than Zach Wilson or Mike White. Like there's no way that he's not unless he literally falls off a cliff and dies. But the question is just like, how much better is he going to be? Is he going to make up the deficiencies that you might get on the defense if the defense doesn't perform as well as they did last year? I don't know. You bring in, I mean, really, honestly, I would feel so much better about the Jets offense if they kept Mike LaFleur.
Yes.
That was such a mistake.
Again, and that's like part of the reason because like the last how many months on this podcast, years even, we've been talking about how well the Jets have built this. They just got the quarterback wrong. And like they are in the position where they have the ability, the opportunity to go out and get that quarterback, and they just rearrange the chessboard to get him, right? Like they have to roll out the red carpet, bring in his buddies, Nat Hackett, Randall Cobb.
Nate Hackett is going through it right now. Like, have you seen that man's facial hair? That dude's going through a midlife crisis.
No, I'm intrigued though. Oh, I have to look this up. Please carry
You
the
look
show.
this up. I'll try and wrap things up here. Another thing with the Jets, that offensive line, another question mark, right? Like Mekhi Becton has once again called out this team. Which, by the way, there are a couple of guys who have been calling out this team for management and especially injury management, which is not a very good look. You have, Elijah Vera Tucker has been very good for them, but they've had to move him across the line because of injuries. Who was the tackle? They took a tackle last year, right? Am I remembering this correctly?
I just remember Vera Tucker. I do not remember a tackle. If you give me 1 second as I try to.
No. You keep looking up Nate Hackett facial hair, and I'll look up this Jets tackle. But yeah, I don't know.
I did see his facial hair. Not good.
Oh, it's awful.
It's really
disgusting. Bad. It's horrendous. Have Max Mitchell. Is that who you're talking about?
That's a tackle who they took.
Okay, I might be thinking of something else then. Oh boy. They have Dwayne Brown. They still have Laken Tomlinson. Yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot that I feel great about on this offensive line. And if you have a quarterback that's 40 years old, who's a traditional pocket passer, it's not great. It really just isn't. I cannot, in good faith and in good conscience, believe in a team that is relying so much on a 40-year-old quarterback who is like trying to make a Nate Hackett offense work.
Which he's done in the past, to be fair. But...
Okay, no. He's made Matt LaFleur's offense work. Nate Hackett was along for the ride because I've never, ever... Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you've heard something that I haven't. But anytime I have ever heard anybody that Nate Hackett has worked with say anything about Nate Hackett, it has always been, oh, that dude's a great guy. He's a great guy to have around. He's a nice guy to have around. He's full of energy.
Friend of the show.
I've never heard anyone say Nate Hackett is a great football coach. I've never heard anybody say Nate Hackett is a great play caller. He knows the game super well. I've never heard anybody say anything about his football. Never.
Fair. No, again, I think we fairly ranked the Jets here. Again, I liked a lot of what they were doing. The whole Aaron Rodgers situation this offseason got dragged out. It's a little, maybe not perfectly executed, if you will, by any party. But no, I think this is fair. I think they are going to be they were a good team last year. I think they were going to be a much improved team. And I think, above the Jags is fair. Let's move on here to the Pats, the other team in the AFC East, finish off the AFC East. They should be here. This team will be bad and sad, but they're coached by Bill Belichick, so they're going to end up, going roughly 500. We have less than 30 minutes to get through the remaining 16.
We're going to very quickly talk about the
turbo
Patriots.
Mode. Right. Last season, they go 8-9, don't have an offensive coordinator all year, and they get one in the offseason. They get that guy, right? They get a dude to call plays who has done it before. They get Bill O'Brien as offensive coordinator. They lose Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, and Damian Harris in free agency, and they signed Juju Smith-Schuster, Calvin Anderson, Mike Gesicki, Riley Reif, and James Robinson. And then in the draft, they get Christian Gonzalez, a very good value at 17, right? This is a potential top 10 pick, a potential draft steal there. They also get Keon White, Marte Mapu, Keishon Butte. And again, they made 12 picks in this draft. So this is a team that is injecting some youth into a roster and a lineup.
Two of those picks were a kicker and a punter, but yes.
Interesting. Right there, they count sometimes. But again, like, this team isn't fun. This team is boring. This team is not going to be fun to watch. Because again, they have Mac Jones throwing the football. That's the question mark, is which Mac Jones are you going to get? You're probably going to get something closer to rookie year Mac Jones.
Will Mac Jones beat the mid allegations? Probably not.
No, he's not going to, but they're going to win 8 games or 9 games because that's what they do, right? He's going to be the most middling quarterback leading the most middling
here's the other thing, right? Here's the other thing. They took a cornerback in the first round. And he's a good cornerback, and I think he'll play really well for the Patriots, which is unfortunate, but that's reality. Does that change anything for them? Does drafting Christian Gonzalez changed or
Not
moved the
this
needle
year.
for them?
No, not
Not
this
really.
year.
So, like, this defense scored a ton last year and created a lot of turnovers. Can they do that again this year? Probably not. I don't know. I mean, it seems unlikely. The offense will probably be more functional than it was last year, just because you have an actual experienced offensive coordinator. But are they going to be anything more than mid? And if they're not,
No.
I don't think the defense is going to carry them the way that it did last year. And you have 2 rookie specialists.
Yeah. And they're not afraid to cut them, so we'll see what they actually do. But
Sure.
just like, again, I like their draft even. I like Christian Gonzalez a lot. I like Marte Mapu. That's what we've talked about for years regarding the Patriots. Just like in terms of, right there, that defense looks old. That defense needs speed. That defense needs youth. They get that in Marte Mapu. He's going to be a problem for the Bills. Maybe not this year, but no, he's going to be a player that the Bills and teams have to, I think, factor into defensive game plans, just given his or offensive game plans, given his versatility and a rangy ability. Again, but like, that receiving core is not good. Like Juju's good. Like Gesicki's going to be a weapon. A tight end playing slot receiver, if you will. I don't know what we would call that. He's still a tight end. He's still a tight end.
Yeah.
Fun. But like, no, those are their best 2 weapons. Though again, they lose Jacoby Myers, who I think is a very big loss for them. So they are going to focus on running the ball, which they are going to be able to do because they have Ramondre Stevenson, who I think is a very underrated and very good running back, Boomer Sooner. But like, this is a team that Kayshon Boutte, a 5th round pick, has a realistic shot at coming out of training camp as the number 1 receiving option. He's not going to, but it's a possibility that wouldn't shock me, right? Like, this is a team that has nothing really at receiver. And again, with Mac Jones and just their lack of weapons and Bill O'Brien calling the plays, I'm not energized by their passing attack, right? They're going to live and die by the run to try to establish the passing game, and we'll see if they do it. Again, as middling as this team, as this roster is, they're going to be around 500 coming the end of the year.
All right, let's move on.
Right, last in the AFC East, just given how good the rest of the division is. Las Vegas Raiders. That seems fair. Last season, they go 6-11. They lose Derek Carr, Foster Moreau, Darren Waller. They trade him off to the Giants, the football Giants, of course, not the baseball ones. Rocky Yassin, they lose, and Jarrett Stidham, huge loss. They also signed Jimmy Garoppolo, Marcus Epps, Robert Spillane, I think, and then Brandon. Facyson, as we said earlier, and Austin Hooper. They have a fun draft. They really do. They get Tyree Wilson, Michael Mayer, who's going to be a good tight end in a couple of years, Byron Young, Trey Tucker. They also get a guy that we've talked about a lot on this show, and Chris Smith there at the end of the draft. But look, no, I don't like Josh McDaniels as a coach or an offensive.
He's bad.
Don't like him. I don't like Jimmy G, really. I tolerated him.
Going from Derek Carr to Jimmy G is the most like equalizer move ever.
Right.
That did not move the needle up or down. You are right where you were when you had Derek Carr. I don't get that move at all. Josh Jacobs was legitimately great last year. Just switched his number to number 8, which I think is great. Yep. Also, this team as a whole, yikes. It's not good, and they're in a tough division, and I think they're going to be bad, and that's all I want to say about them. I cannot emphasize this enough. Yikes.
True. Yeah, very good point there on that last point. I tolerated Jimmy G when he was with Kyle Shanahan. With Josh McDaniels, he's not going to be very good. I like the top of the receiving core a whole hell of a lot. Love Devontae Adams. How could you not? Jacoby Myers, love Jacoby Myers. Right? Like, I thought he was very underrated in New England. I think he's with in a better system, with a better quarterback, I think he'd be really good. I don't know if that's going to be in Las Vegas this year. And then Hunter Renfrow had a down year last year, but generally speaking is a good slot receiver. And again, like you said, Josh Jacobs defensively, they have dudes I like. I like Max Crosby a lot. I like Tyree Wilson. I think he's going to be an interesting piece. This year's not the year. I don't think they're going to be very good. I think they're going to be a sneaky Caleb Williams team. Probably not that bad. I don't know if they're going to be bad enough to be in the Caleb Williams running, maybe more of a Drake May team or a Quinn Ewers team, but they're not going to be good, and they're not going to be particularly fun to watch. So that's why they're here. Okay.
Yeah.
Baltimore, moving on. Again, just throwing them here for now. This isn't where they will end up. Last season, they go 10-7. They lose in the wild card game to Cincinnati. They replace Greg Roman in the offseason, bringing in Todd Monken, again, who's going to presumably air it out more with the recently paid Lamar Jackson. Got a bag and also got some surrounding weapons. They bring in OBJ and Nelson Aguilar in free agency. Whoa, Nelson Aguilar. Talk about a needle mover. Also bring in Rock Ya-Sin from the Raiders. And then in the draft, of course, they get Zay Flowers, Trenton Simpson, Andrew Voorhees. They get there in the 7th round to redshirt a year, which is what they do, right? They take those uber talented might be a little much for Andrew Voorhees, but they draft dudes who they know if they have to sit for a year because of injury, whatever. Our team's good enough that we can let them sit for a year. So yeah, with them. Look, this was a team that was good last year. It's going to be a question this year of how quickly can that offensive system be installed effectively? Which OBJ do we get? But look, Lamar's a good quarterback, right? Like, regardless of what you want to say about Lamar or what people want to say about Lamar, dude's a good quarterback. You get OBJ, who hasn't played football in a year and a half, so I don't think we're getting the player that we once got, but I think he's going to be good. Also draft Zay Flowers, who's going to be really good. Rashad Bateman, if he can stay healthy. J.K. Dobbins, if he can stay healthy. And then defensively, Trenton Simpson joining Roquan Smith in that linebacker core. It should be a fun team. I don't know where to put him though. Probably here.
I'm gonna be bold.
Oh boy.
And I'm gonna put them above the Browns.
Yeah, I knew it.
Yeah. I'm very confident with this roster. I like this coaching staff. I like switching from Greg Roman to Todd Monken. I like that they've added actual legitimate receivers for once.
Yep.
And the only thing that's really going to hold this team back is going to be health, which has been such a big issue the last 2 years. I mean, they've had so many injuries, and in that NFLPA survey that got released, right? The Ravens were, I don't know if they were dead last. I think they were dead last in terms of injury management and treatment and all that, all that sort of stuff, which is very telling. Especially, and here's the other interesting part: when the Ravens during 2020 had that COVID outbreak in their locker room, do you remember where it originated?
Baltimore?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, no, I mean, no. It originated with their head trainer. And I don't know if he ended up getting fired. I don't know if he ended up getting moved down or whatever, but ever since then, it's not been good on that front for the Ravens. So, but if that ends up being okay for them, if they remain healthy, this is a very dangerous team in the AFC. I think that, they can still run the ball effectively because you have Lamar Jackson. I still believe in J.K. Dobbins, although my faith is wavering with every year.
They got Gus Bus, though.
That's right. I mean, the reality is you could put a number of different running backs. I think that they'll be pretty good just running the football. It's just who they are. But what they need to do is be better in the passing game. I think Todd Monken is going to allow them to be better in the passing game, having a healthy Rashad Bateman, hopefully, having a healthy OBJ, hopefully, and Zay Flowers. And, of course, you have Mark Andrews, who's phenomenal. And you also have Isaiah Likely, who was pretty good for them last year.
Love Isaiah Likely. Again, just wish Isaiah Likely was on any team, not the Ravens. I wish he was on a team where he could play football. That'd be great. That'd be great for me. But, again.
But, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of ifs. It's a lot of ifs. I understand that. I realize that. I acknowledge all that. I still feel generally more confident in them than I do the Jets or the Browns at the moment, though I will say the margin between the Browns and the Ravens is pretty thin.
Yes. Okay. Moving on. Pittsburgh Steelers,
Moving
the
on.
last AFC North team.
Yes.
This is a team, again, they go 9-8 last year. They made a ton of changes in the offseason, revamping a lot of the roster. They lose Cameron Sutton, Devin Bush, Terrell Edmonds, Miles Jack, and Robert Spillane in free agency. And they sign Isaac Sumalo, the guard, Cole Holcomb, Nate Herbig, Keanu Neal, Patrick Peterson, Elandon Roberts. And then in the draft, they get Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Darnell Washington, and Nick Herbig. Again, this is a team that basically revamped its defense outside of the studs, right? Outside of TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. This is a defense that's mostly totally remade. Same with the offensive line. I think they'll have at least 3 new starters next year. So again, the questions are, there's a lot of question marks with this team. How quickly can that new defense gel? Does the new defense gel? Same with the offensive line. And behind said offensive line, does the running game get going again this year? Does Najee look like not a bad player, right? These are all question marks that we don't know as of right now. And Kenny Pickett, what is he in year 2? I like that receiving core. George Pickens that showed flashes last year. Deontay Johnson is what he is, a very good wide receiver. Do they find something for Calvin Austin to do this year? Who knows? But again, this is a team that a lot of question marks, could be good. I'm somewhere between tier 3 and tier 4. I think they're going to be fun. I think they're going to be sneaky fun. They're going to be less fun than the Colts, a lot of less fun potential. But given Mike Tomlin, they're going to be pushing 500. So they almost have to be here.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I don't trust Matt Canada.
Not at all.
I think Pickett was low key fine last year.
Yeah, especially toward the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have good receivers because they always seem to have good receivers.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how I feel about Matt Canada. Actually, no, I do know how I feel about Matt Canada. I don't trust him. I don't think he's good. But Mike Tomlin, if they went 7-10 last year, right?
Yes.
8-9.
They went 9. Who?
The Steelers.
They went 9-8.
9-8. Again, if he can do 9-8 with that garbage roster last year, they can at least be 8 wins this year, if not 9 or 10. I don't know. This team is unpredictable because they should be bad, and they're not going to be because they've got Mike Tomlin. That's it.
Exactly. That's all I need to say. Texans again seems like another layup. Last season they go 3-13-1. And then they hired DeMeco Ryans in the offseason. Good hire, right? Has thus far
very good hire.
Right, has shown signs of being a very good culture team builder, just a good coach. Their losses include Brandon Cooks, Ogbanya Okenoro, the Boomer Sooner. But then they sign a lot of free agent acquisitions: Robert Woods, Jimmy Ward, Sheldon Rankins, Dalton Schultz, Andrew Beck, Shaq Griffin, Mike Boone, Devin Singletary, and Denzel Perryman. And then in the draft, they get CJ Stroud, trade up to get Will Anderson, Juice Scruggs, Tank Dell, among others. Exciting young team with an exciting young coach that seems like they finally, after all of these years, have a direction, right? That receiving core is fun, right? With Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, who they drafted, Robert Woods, and then they also have John Mechie, who I am a big John Mechie fan. Super excited to watch him play this year. All that being said, they're not very good, right? They're going to be a much improved team. They're not very good. Exciting future finally in Houston. But still, they are not going to be as fun as Indy this year, I don't think. And I think we have placed them in their correct slot.
Yeah. I like Houston. I like what they're building there. You look at that team, it's really not you kind of expect that roster to be worse than it actually is. It's really not awful. It's not good, but it's not awful. And I do think that DeMeco Ryans is such a huge upgrade over Lovie Smith. It's not even close. And I love that Ryans is able to go back to the team that drafted him. His wife still lived in Houston. So it's nice for him to be able to go to this organization, and it seems like they are trusting him and are committing to him, and they're not going to be rotating in some new head coach next year. This is going to be their guy, and it should be. I think that CJ Stroud with Bobby Slowick, their new offensive coordinator, another one of these, wide zone, Shanahan tree type of guys. You know what you're going to get. I think this is a good fit for him. I think that there's potential with someone like you said, John Mechie. I think their offensive line, low key, pretty solid overall, like really not that bad. So overall, I think this is a pretty good team, relatively speaking.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Relative to what they've been in the last couple of years, I think that they will be so much more watchable and so much more enjoyable. So,
right.
Yeah.
Again, there's a direction.
Bad, but
right?
fun. Yeah.
They're building something now. They are not
Right.
in their 5-year teardown to nothing, right? They are finally building it back up. And again, Derek Stingley, and a defense that fits him. I am Will Anderson. This is going to be a fun team to watch, red zone highlights up, but like they're not competing for anything this year. I don't think in that division though, they might mess around. We'll see. Tennessee, speaking of that division, genuinely no clue where to put Tennessee. Such a question mark. Put them
They're
here
going
for
to
now,
be
but
bad
I don't
and sad.
Interesting. I don't know if I agree. Last season, they go 7-10. They lose Nate Davis, DeMarcus Walker, Robert Woods, David Long, Bud Dupree, and Austin Hooper. And then they sign Andre Dillard, Arden Key, Sean Bunting, Aziz Al-Shair, Luke Gifford, and Daniel Brunskill is that name. And then in the draft, they get Peter Skoronski, who's going to play guard for them, presumably. Very good, right? Good player. And then they draft presumably their quarterback of the future a year after they drafted their presumptive quarterback of the future. They get Will Levis this time around, also Derrick Henry's presumptive successor a year after they get Derrick Henry's presumptive successor. This time it's Tyjae Spears. But just like, look, there's a lot of question marks with this team, as you can always say, but like that line, you're going to have Dillard and Skoronski now. Fun, but how much does Derrick Henry have left in the tank? I think he has a little bit left in the tank, at least a year or two left. But again, that receiving core, not great, right? Like I like Traylon Burks a lot, but then they have like Kyle Phillips and Westbrook Akini, like those are the other dudes, and it's like that's not a great receiving core. And then like defensively, it's like I like Kevin Byard, I like Christian Fulton, but like that's not great. Like
They have so many corners, and I have no idea if any of them are actually good or not.
Yeah, Caleb Farley too, right?
Yep.
Like I don't know. And like I say these things, right? I've said for years about the Titans, right? Like their roster does not scare me. I look at their roster, I'm never like they're a good team, but just time and time again, they have been a good team. That's a hallmark of good coaching. So like I cannot sit here and say the Titans are going to be a bad team because Mike Vrabel is going to get them to punch above their weight class, I think, which is why, again, they're not here. They're not in the Indy Houston tandem because they're never fun. They're not a fun team, right? Like that's just kind of not what they are. You get the Mike Vrabel press conference.
Even when they are good, they're not fun.
No, and that's kind of how they're built. That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
But like I don't know if they're not going to be Raiders bad. And like how it's kind of shaken out here, the Raiders are the only team down there. They're not going to be as bad or as sad as the Raiders.
No, but they're also just not interesting and they're not fun.
So they kind of like by default, they went 7-10 last year. They're going to be pushing 500.
Are you sure?
Titans bad and not fun. Oh boy, I don't want this to, because like, look, they're.
Do you feel like the Texans are going to win more? Do you feel like the Texans are going to win more games than the Titans?
No.
Do you feel like the Colts are going to win more games than the Titans?
No.
I think you just answered. I think the Colts have a chance to win more games than the Titans. I think the Texans probably not. But if you feel like the Titans can win more games than if you think the Titans can win more games than the Colts, then you should put them above the Colts.
I think this this tier seems right to me, right? Where it's just like
You just like the symmetry between the two tiers.
Well, this tier, and again, this does kind of look like a bar graph, which is kind of how it should look. But just like I think that this seems accurate, right? Like they're in this tier of like teams that have potential, but just like they're not great. They're not the most talented, and there's too many question marks to say that they are genuinely good. That's wild that the Chargers ended up here.
It is who they are, though.
Right? It is. It's just true.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, we'll make final edits here in a second, but as of right now, it looks like our list is Super Bowl contenders. We got Chiefs, Bengals, Bills. Good, but not tier 1. We have Dolphins, Ravens, Browns, Jets, Jaguars, and then 500 middling teams: Chargers, Broncos, Patriots, Steelers, Titans. Bad but fun, Colts and Texans. Bad and sad, Raiders.
Yep.
This seems fair to me. Screenshot that. We'll go over this again next year.
There you go.
Thank you guys for watching. We would like to ask you, if you're feeling crazy, please subscribe to the Cover One YouTube channel. The subscribe button is somewhere down there. Also subscribe to the iTunes feed of the Cover One Roundup and leave a review. That would be much appreciated. We lost all our subscribers, and Apple just decided to, go crazy.
Because Apple sucks.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Apple freaking sucks. That's all there is to it. Apple sucks, so make them not suck by resubscribing on iTunes if you were a subscriber on iTunes.
Much obliged. Even if you weren't, right? Like that'd be cool. Leave an honest review. And then also subscribe to all of the podcast feeds for Cover One, because they all got unsubscribed. And also check out all the other shows here. You got Air Raid Hour starting in fewer than 5 minutes here. And then we also have throughout the week Cover One Film Room, disguised coverage. Also got Cover One Buffalo, Going Deep, If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Oh, I'm forgetting some. The Greg Thompson Show. What else am I forgetting? I don't know. I'm a bad guy. I'm not a company man, but just trust that basically every night of the week we have content for you. We got you covered. So make sure to check it out, subscribe, and it'll all show up right in your subscription feed. Make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy and BetUS. Use promo code Cover1, and check out cover1.football. Bunch of great articles, as David plugged earlier. And make sure to consider subscribing to Cover One Pass. What is that? Great question. That is our subscription service, if you will. You have access to exclusive members-only content, breakdown, articles, all that good stuff. Only $57 a year. Become an insider today. What a great value. Make sure to follow David on Twitter at.
You can follow me right here at DFAUXY. And before we go, I'm gonna I don't want to say call out, but I'm gonna mention one of our very loyal fans, Roy Collins, who is the internet service provider watchdog of this podcast.
Yes, he is.
Who has always mentioned my quote unquote Walmart Wi-Fi. We have made a fix, and it seems to have worked.
It worked brilliantly.
A very, very long Ethernet cable is running from one end of the house to the other. And it seemed pretty stable. So just wanted to mention that.
It was perfect.
Thank you. Kyle, where can the people find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Kyle Silagyi. Thank you guys for watching, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.